The warehouse at Broken Ridge looked ready to collapse. Daniel Frost stood 50 yards from its doors, his daughter's hand trembling in his own. Clara was 4 years old and had not spoken a single word in 8 months. Not since the day they buried her mother on the hill behind their ranch. The December wind cut through Daniel's worn coat, carrying with it the sound he had tried to ignore. Laughter, the kind that had no joy in it, the kind that fed on suffering and called it entertainment. He should have kept riding, should have collected his supplies and headed home before the storm hit. But something in that laughter made him stop, something cruel that pulled at old instincts he thought he had buried along with his wife. Clara tugged at his hand. Her eyes, so much like Sarah's it hurt to look at them, were fixed on the warehouse. She could hear it too, the ugliness in those voices. Children always could. Daniel knelt beside his daughter. Her face was pale dark hair hanging loose. Sarah used to braid it. He never learned how. "We don't have to go in there, sweetheart," he said quietly. "We can just go home." Clara did not answer. She never did. But she looked at him with those knowing eyes, and Daniel felt the weight of her silence like a stone in his chest. He started to stand when the laughter grew louder. A woman's scream cut through it, sharp and terrible, followed by the sound of metal striking metal. The crowd inside thought it was funny. Clara's hand tightened around his fingers, not pulling him away, pulling him forward. "All right," he whispered. "All right." Inside smelled of unwashed bodies and smoke. 40 people packed tight breath steaming in frozen air. Daniel kept Clara close as they pushed through to where he could see. At the center sat a cage, 6 feet square, built from iron bars meant for livestock. Rust bled down the corners, and inside that cage, sitting with her spine impossibly straight, was a woman who refused to break. She was Apache. Daniel could tell from her features, from the way she held herself despite everything they had done to her. She wore a stained calico dress, feet bare despite the cold. Her face carried the map of recent violence. Purple bloomed along her cheekbone. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth. But it was the collar that made Daniel's stomach turn. Thick iron 2 inches wide locked around her throat. The kind of thing a man might use to chain a dog. Engraved across the front. Property of J. Sterling. The metal had rubbed her skin raw. Fresh blood seeped where the collar sat heaviest against her collarbone. Her hands were bound with leather straps, wrists crossed like a penitent's prayer. She did not beg. She did not weep. She simply sat in that cage with a dignity that made the crowd uncomfortable. So they laughed louder to cover it. Daniel had seen this in the war. Some souls refused to break no matter what was done to them. This woman was one of those. Walter Crawford stood on a crate, voice carrying like a barker's. "Now then, folks, what am I bid strong back on her good teeth? Can cook, can clean, can do whatever work you set before her." Daniel felt Clara press against his leg. He looked down and saw his daughter staring not at the woman in the cage, but at something else, something that made his blood run cold. Sitting on the floor outside the cage, small enough that the crowd had not noticed at first, was a child. A little girl no more than 3 years old, with dark hair and the same Apache features as the woman inside. She wore a dress made from burlap sacking. Her feet were bare and blackened with dirt, and around her ankle was an iron shackle chained to the cage bars. The child sat perfectly still, the same way the woman did. Silent. Watching. Her eyes held the kind of emptiness that Daniel had only seen in soldiers who had looked at death too long. Clara's hand was shaking in his. Daniel realized his daughter was crying. Silent tears running down her cheeks as she stared at this other little girl who sat chained like an animal. "Do I hear $8? Crawford called out. $8 for a workhorse that won't talk back." A ripple of laughter. In the back corner, Clayton Hargrove leaned against a post, arms crossed. Fine coat, polished boots. Hargrove owned the largest mine in the territory and believed he owned people too. He smiled with the certainty of a man who always got what he wanted. $5, Hargrove called out. "That's all she's worth." Crawford's face twitched. He knew who paid his rent. "5 then. Do I hear 6? Silence. 5 going once. 5 going. 15. Heads turned. Whispers started like fire catching dry grass. Clayton Hargrove pushed off from his post, his smile fading. "Frost," he said, making the name sound like an accusation. "Didn't figure you for this kind of transaction." Daniel kept his eyes on the woman in the cage. She had turned her head slightly, just enough to see who had spoken. Their gazes met and held. In that moment something passed between them. Not recognition, but understanding. Two people who knew what it meant to lose everything. $15, Daniel said again. For both of them. Crawford swallowed. Mr. Hargrove bid 5 for the woman, and you're saying 15 for the woman and the child. Both. Daniel's voice was steady. Unless you're planning to sell a 3-year-old girl separately. The warehouse went quiet. Even the cruelest among them shifted uncomfortably. Hargrove stepped closer. "You know what she is, Frost. She's Apache. The same savages who've been raiding settlements, killing good Christian folk." "I know what she is," Daniel said quietly. "A woman in a cage, and a child who shouldn't be in chains. They're property, legal property. Then I'm buying them." Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out his leather pouch. He counted coins into his palm. 4 silver dollars, 2 bills, smaller coins, everything he had. Gone now for 2 strangers. He knew why. Clara had cried. His silent daughter had wept for a chained child. That was reason enough. Hargrove's hand moved to his hip where he carried a pistol. "You're making a mistake, Frost. Wouldn't be my first." They stared at each other. Daniel had killed men in the war, enough to know what violence looked like before it spilled over. He saw Hargrove calculating, measuring cost against profit. Finally, Hargrove stepped back. "Your funeral." He turned and shoved through the crowd, his men following. Crawford cleared his throat. $15 then, sold to Mr. Frost." He banged a gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Daniel poured the money into Crawford's hand. The auctioneer counted twice, made a notation, then produced a key. The cage door screamed when he unlocked it. Rusted hinges that had not been oiled in months. The woman did not move. Daniel crouched beside the cage, careful not to touch the bars, eye level now, close enough to see the tremor in her hands, though her face remained stone. "My name is Daniel Frost," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I have a daughter about the same age as—" He gestured toward the chained child. "I'm taking you both out of here. You understand?" The woman's eyes searched his face for the lie, the trap, the cruelty that always came with soft words. After a long moment she shifted, but she did not fall. Daniel shrugged out, but she did not fall. Daniel shrugged out of his coat. The cold bit through his shirt, but he held it out to her. For the cold, she stared at it. Then, careful as prayer, she took it, drew it around her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame, but it was warm and freely given. Something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the first seed of it. Daniel knelt beside the child. The little girl watched him with empty eyes, not moving. He examined the shackle around her ankle. Old metal, poorly made. "Crawford, key for the child." "Ain't got one. Sterling never gave me one." Daniel pulled his working knife and wedged it into the lock mechanism. Once, twice. On the third try, the shackle fell open. The child did not react, did not rub her ankle or try to stand, just sat there as if she had forgotten what freedom looked like. The woman made a sound, the first sound she had made, a single word in a language Daniel did not speak, soft and breaking. The child looked up at her. Then slowly the little girl stood and walked to the woman, who gathered her up with bound hands and held her close. Daniel cut the leather straps binding the woman's wrists. They fell away, leaving deep red marks. She flexed her fingers, testing. Then she looked at Daniel, and he saw something in her eyes that looked like judgment, measuring whether this white man was any different from the one who had sold her. "Are you coming?" Daniel asked. A pause, then the soft shuffle of bare feet on frozen ground behind him. They walked through town, People stared. A woman pulled her child away. A miner spat. Daniel kept walking. At the edge of town, Reverend Hayes stepped into their path, silver-haired, stern-faced, wearing black coat and white collar. He looked at Daniel with something like sorrow. "You know what you're doing, son?" "No, Reverend, I don't." "Then why do it?" Daniel glanced back at the woman, at the child in her arms, at the iron collar still locked around her throat. At Clara walking beside them, no longer crying, but watching everything. "Because it's right," he said simply. Hayes studied him. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, pressed it into Daniel's palm. "Your wife was a good woman, Daniel. She wouldn't want you to lose yourself to grief." He paused. "Or to guilt." The words hit harder than expected. Daniel closed his hand around the coin, unable to speak. Hayes stepped aside. "Let them pass." 2 miles out, Daniel stopped at a frozen creek, filled his canteen. The woman watched, child in her arms, both wary as wild things. Daniel wet his handkerchief and turned to face them. "You're bleeding," he said, gesturing to the woman's face. "May I?" She did not answer, but she set the child down and stepped forward. Daniel lifted the cloth to her face, dabbing gently at the dried blood on her temple. The cut would scar. He moved to her split lip, her bruised cheek. His hands were careful. Sarah had taught him this. "The collar," he said quietly. "I'll need tools to remove it. Tomorrow, I promise." The woman's hand moved to her throat, fingers touching the iron. She looked at him, searching for the lie. Daniel met her gaze and did not look away. After a moment, she nodded once. Daniel turned to the child. The little girl sat in the snow, bare feet tucked under her dress, watching with terrible, empty eyes. Clara, who had been standing by the horse, suddenly moved. She walked over to the Apache child and sat down beside her in the snow. Did not speak. Did not touch. Just sat there. The 2 little girls looked at each other, 4 years old and 3 years old. One who had stopped speaking when her mother died, one who perhaps had never been allowed to speak at all. And then Clara did something Daniel had not seen in 8 months. She smiled, small and tentative but real. And the Apache child, after a long moment, smiled back. Daniel felt something break open in his chest, some tight fist of grief finally loosening its grip. The woman was staring at the children, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "What's her name?" Daniel asked softly. "The child." The woman was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough from disuse, accented but clear. "Nalin," she said. "Her name is Nalin." "And yours?" Another pause. "Ayana. Ayana. It's a good name." She said nothing to that, just looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, survived too much. "It's another mile to my ranch," Daniel said. "We should go before the storm hits." Ayana gathered Nalin up again, wrapping his coat tighter around them both. Clara walked close to her father, small hand finding his. They continued through the snow. The sky had gone dark gray. Wind picked up, carrying the first fat flakes. When they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Daniel felt emotions he could not name. This place had been home once, where Sarah had laughed, where he had buried her 8 months ago and wanted to climb into the grave beside her. Now he was bringing strangers here, a woman who had every reason to hate men who looked like him, a child who had been chained like an animal, and his own daughter who watched everything and said nothing. "It's not much," Daniel said as they approached, "but it's warm and it's safe." Ayana looked at the small cabin, at the sagging barn, at the mountains rising behind it all. "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word, as if she no longer believed such a place existed. Daniel opened the door. Inside was cold, the fire long dead. Dust coated everything. On a shelf above the fireplace sat a photograph face down. He had not turned it over in 8 months. "You and Nalin can sleep in there," he said, pointing to a small room. "It was going to be my son's room. Sarah had just started preparing it when she died. I'll sleep in the barn with Clara." Ayana turned to look at him. "Why? Why what? Why do you give us your house? Why do you sleep in the cold?" Daniel met her eyes. Because I want you to feel safe, and you won't feel safe if I'm sleeping 10 feet away." She studied him, looking for the angle to lie, finding only a tired man with honest eyes and a grief that matched her own. "The collar," she said, touching the iron at her throat. "Tomorrow you will remove it. Yes, I promise." A promise. Such a small word to carry such weight. Ayanna nodded once, then took Nolan's hand and walked into the bedroom, closing the door softly. Daniel stood alone in the cold cabin. He built a fire in the hearth, watching flames catch and grow. Clara sat nearby, staring into the fire with silent intensity. Outside, night settled over Wyoming. Stars emerged hard and bright. Daniel thought about the $15, about the look in Ayanna's eyes, about the promise he had just made, about two little girls sitting in the snow smiling at each other despite everything the world had done to them. And for the first time in 8 months, Daniel Frost felt something other than grief. He felt purpose, fragile and uncertain, but there all the same. In the bedroom, Ayanna sat on the edge of the small bed with Nolan curled against her. The mattress was thin but clean. Through the gap beneath the door, firelight painted a golden line. She touched the collar again, felt the weight of it. Tomorrow, he said, he would cut it off. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this man with sad eyes was different. But trust was a thing she had lost. Trust got you killed. Trust got children murdered while you watched helpless. Still, she was not in a cage. She was in a room with a door she could open, wearing a coat given freely, and the man who had bought her freedom had asked for nothing in return. Not yet, whispered experience. Not yet, but he will. Ayanna lay down still, wearing Daniel's coat with Nolan pressed close. She did not sleep, just stared at the ceiling, listening to fire and wind, wondering what price would eventually be demanded for this temporary mercy. Outside in the barn, Daniel spread a bedroll. Clara curled beside him, small and silent. He stroked her hair and thought about tomorrow, about removing an iron collar, about 2 children who had found each other, about a woman named Ayanna, who carried herself with dignity despite everything stolen from her. He thought about Sarah's last words spoken from her deathbed 8 months ago. She had made him promise 2 things. First, take care of Clara. No matter what you learn about her, she is yours. Promise me. Second, don't let cruelty win, Daniel. Fight for those who can't fight for themselves. He had promised both, had not understood what she meant about Clara, still did not understand. Tomorrow he would cut away an iron collar, but he could not shake the feeling that there were other chains waiting to be discovered, other prisons he did not yet know existed. Sleep came slowly, and with it dreams of cages and collars and 2 little girls smiling at each other in the snow while the world burned down around them. Dawn came cold and gray to the Frost Ranch. Daniel woke in the barn to the sound of Clara stirring beside him, her small body shivering despite the blankets he had piled over them both. His breath formed clouds in the frozen air. Every joint in his body ached from sleeping on hard ground. He had done this to himself, given away his bed, his home's warmth to 2 strangers. But when he thought about that iron collar, about a child chained to cage bars, the cold seemed a small price to pay. Clara sat up, her dark hair wild around her face. She looked at him with those 2 knowing eyes, waiting, always waiting, for him to speak first, to tell her what the day would bring, to fill the silence she refused to break. "Let's see if our guests are awake," Daniel said quietly. They crossed the yard through ankle-deep snow. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. Someone had built a fire. Daniel felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but close to it. The cabin looked lived in again, looked like something other than a tomb. He knocked softly before entering. Did not want to startle them. Inside, warmth hit him immediately. The fire crackled in the hearth, built properly with kindling and larger logs arranged to burn, slow and steady. Not the work of someone unfamiliar with cold or survival. Ayanna stood at the small iron stove. She had removed his coat and folded it neatly on the chair. Beneath it she still wore the rough calico dress from yesterday, stained and torn. but she had washed her face and hands. The dried blood was gone, revealing the full extent of her bruises. Purple and yellow bloomed across her cheekbone like some terrible flower. The iron collar still circled her throat. In the morning light it looked even more obscene, a mockery of jewelry, a brand of ownership on human flesh. Nalin sat on the floor near the fire, wrapped in a blanket Daniel recognized as one of Sarah's. The child watched them enter with those same empty eyes. No fear, no curiosity, just watching. Clara walked slowly toward Nalin and sat down beside her, careful to maintain distance. The two girls looked at each other in silence. "You built a fire," Daniel said to Ayanna. "Yes." Her voice was still rough, unused to speaking. "It was cold. You could have woken me. You gave us shelter. I can build a fire." There was something in her tone. Not quite defiance, but close to it. A claim to agency, to capability. A reminder that she was not simply receiving charity, but choosing to participate. Daniel understood. He had felt the same way after Sarah died, when neighbors brought food and sympathy. The desperate need to do something, anything, to prove you were not just a victim passively accepting help. "I'm going to make coffee," he said. "And then I'm going to remove that collar, if you're ready." Ayanna's hand moved to her throat, touched the iron. For a moment her carefully controlled expression flickered. Something raw and vulnerable showed through before she locked it away again. "I am ready," she said. Daniel retrieved his tools from the barn. A chisel, tempered steel with a wooden handle worn smooth from use. A hammer, heavy and solid. A file in case the chisel did not work. He carried them back to the cabin with hands that had steadied now that the decision was made. Ayanna sat in the chair, spine, straight, hands folded in her lap. The collar sat heavy at her throat, the engraved words mocking in the morning light. "Property of J. Sterling." Clara and Nalin watched from their place by the fire, two small witnesses to what was about to happen. "This might hurt," Daniel warned. "I'll be as gentle as I can, but the metal is thick." "I have endured worse." The simple statement carried the weight of nightmares. Daniel did not ask what worse meant. The bruises on her face told enough of that story. He knelt beside the chair so their eyes were level. "If you need me to stop at any point, just say so. You're in control here. Understand?" She nodded once. Daniel positioned the chisel against the lock mechanism. The collar had a crude system, an iron pin driven through a hasp. Whoever had made it had been more concerned with function than craftsmanship. The lock had jammed either from rust or deliberate damage. He raised the hammer, brought it down in a controlled strike. The sound rang through the cabin like a bell, metal on metal. The chisel bit into the lock but did not break it. Again, harder this time. The chisel slipped slightly. Daniel's heart jumped, terrified he had struck her, but the blade had caught on metal only. Ayanna had not flinched, had not made a sound. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes, continue." 3 more strikes. 4, 5. His hands were shaking now, not from weakness, but from the careful control it took to hit hard enough to break the lock without driving the chisel into her flesh. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. On the 6th strike something gave, a small sound almost inaudible, a crack in the metal. "Almost there," Daniel murmured. 1 more strike. The lock broke with a sound like a sigh. The collar's mechanism released, and suddenly the weight of it was in Daniel's hands instead of around Ayanna's throat. He lifted it away carefully as if removing a live snake. Set it on the table with a dull clank. Ayanna sat perfectly still. Then her hands moved to her throat, fingers touching the raw skin where the collar had sat. The metal had rubbed away skin, leaving behind open wounds that wept clear fluid. Bruises ringed her neck in shades of purple and yellow. "Let me clean those," Daniel said softly. He fetched clean water and cloth, dabbed at the wounds with a gentleness that would have surprised men who had served with him in the war. Sarah had taught him this. How to care for broken things, how to be gentle when the world had been cruel. As he worked, he noticed Ayanna's breathing had changed, quick and shallow like someone fighting tears. Her jaw was clenched tight, tendons standing out in her neck. "You can cry," Daniel said quietly. You're safe here. And that finally broke something inside her. A single tear slipped down her cheek, then another, then a flood, silent and terrible. Her shoulders shook, but she made no sound, as if crying out loud was a luxury she had been beaten out of. Daniel did not touch her, did not try to comfort her with hollow words. He just finished cleaning her wounds and then stepped back, giving her space to feel what she needed to feel. When the tears finally stopped, Ayanna wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the collar sitting on the table, at the words engraved there, at the blood staining the inside rim. "What will you do with it?" she asked, her voice rough. "Whatever you want." She stood, walked to the table, picked up the collar with both hands. The metal was cold and heavy, a physical weight she had carried for too long. She turned it over, staring at the engraving. "Property." "I want to bury it," she said. "Deep, where no one will ever find it." "Then that's what we'll do." They went outside together, Daniel carrying a shovel from the barn. The sky had clouded over, gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the bite of the mountains. Daniel chose a spot beneath an old oak tree at the edge of his property. The tree was ancient, scarred by lightning and wind, but still standing, still alive despite everything that had tried to kill it. It seemed fitting. He drove the shovel into the frozen earth. The ground fought him hard as stone from the cold, but he kept digging. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the temperature. 1 foot down, 2, 3. He did not stop until the hole was 4 feet deep, so deep that even spring floods would not unearth what lay buried there. Ayanna knelt at the edge of the hole. She held the collar over the opening arms, trembling slightly. For a moment she just held it there as if saying goodbye to something. Not the collar itself, but what it represented. Captivity, degradation, the theft of her name and self. Then she let go. Daniel filled the hole. Shoveled dirt and frozen earth back in until the ground was level again. Packed it down with the back of the shovel. When he finished, no one would know anything was buried there unless they were looking for it. Ayanna stood watching, one hand pressed against her throat where the collar had been, where her skin could finally breathe, where wounds could finally begin to heal. "It is done," she said softly. "Yes." They stood in silence beneath the oak tree. Two people marked by violence trying to find their way toward something else. Behind them the cabin door opened. Clara and Nolan emerged wrapped together in Sarah's blanket. They had been watching from the window. Now they came to stand with the adults, 4 people bound together by circumstance and choice. Clara looked up at her father, then at Ayanna, then at the freshly turned earth beneath the oak. She did not speak, but Daniel saw understanding in her eyes. His daughter knew what had just been buried, not just a piece of metal, but a piece of the past, a piece of suffering. Nolan reached out and took Ayanna's hand. The woman looked down at the child and something passed between them, a shared grief, a shared survival, a shared hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. They were halfway back to the cabin when they heard hoofbeats, a single rider coming fast up the trail from town. Daniel's hand went instinctively to his hip where his Colt rested in its holster. Then he recognized the horse, the rider, Sheriff Tom Bridger. "Get inside," Daniel said quietly to Ayanna. But she did not move. She stood beside him, Nolan in her arms, watching the rider approach. Whatever was coming, she would face it standing up. Bridger reined in his horse 20 feet from the cabin. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle face, weathered and tired. He had been Daniel's friend once back before the war. Now he was just a man trying to keep his job in a town run by men like Clayton Hargrove. "Daniel," he said by way of greeting. "Tom. Got a complaint filed this morning. Hargrove says you stole his property. I bought her fair and square. Crawford witnessed the transaction. $15. I've got the receipt if you need to see it." "That's not what Hargrove says. Says you interfered with his bid. Says the woman and child belong to him by rights." Daniel's voice went cold as the wind. "The woman belongs to no one, least of all Hargrove." Bridger sighed, the sound of a man caught between duty and conscience. You know how this looks, Daniel. You know what folks are saying. I don't give a damn what folks are saying. Look, I know you're a good man, but you're making this hard on yourself. Hard on her, too. He glanced at Ayanna. If you just let me take her to the reservation office, get her registered properly, this whole thing could blow over. And what happens at the reservation office, Tom? Bridger did not answer. They send her back to Sterling's estate as settlement for his debts. They sell her again. No, that's not happening. She stays here. Free. End of discussion. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. There's laws, Daniel. Indians need proper documentation to live with white folks. Guardian papers. Without those, I got no choice but to... She's my wife. The words hung in the cold air like smoke. Bridger stared at him. Ayanna turned sharply, eyes wide. Daniel had not planned to say it, had not even fully formed the thought until the words left his mouth. But now that they were spoken, he realized they were the only solution, the only way to protect her under a law designed to strip away her humanity. "What?" Bridger said finally. "We were married yesterday, by Reverend Hayes. She's a citizen now through marriage. Your court has no jurisdiction." It was a lie. But it was a lie that could become truth if Daniel moved fast enough, if Hayes would help him, if Ayanna would agree. Bridger looked between them, searching for confirmation. Ayanna's face had gone carefully blank, but Daniel saw calculation in her eyes. She was smart. She understood what he had just offered and what it would cost them both. "I'll need to see papers," Bridger said slowly. "Come back tomorrow. I'll have them." The sheriff sat his horse for a long moment, weighing options. Finally he nodded. "Tomorrow, then. But Daniel, if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of scheme, I'll have to arrest you. You understand that?" "I understand." Bridger turned his horse and rode away slower this time, thinking, calculating what he would tell Hargrove. When the hoofbeats faded, Daniel turned to find Ayanna staring at him. "Wife," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "It's the only way. Under territorial law, if you marry a citizen, you become a citizen. They can't touch you then. You did not ask me." "I know. I'm sorry. But Tom will be back tomorrow, and if we don't have marriage papers, he'll take you. Take Nolan. I couldn't let that happen." Ayanna set Nolan down gently, walked toward Daniel until she stood close enough that he could see the pulse jumping in her throat where the collar had been, close enough to see the fury and fear and desperate calculation in her eyes. "You would bind yourself to me?" she asked. "A stranger, an Apache. You would make me your wife to save me from your laws?" "Yes." "Why?" Daniel thought about Sarah's last words, about Clara crying for a chained child, about two little girls smiling at each other in the snow, about the fact that he had failed to save his wife, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this woman and this child. "Because it's right," he said, "and because I've spent 8 months doing nothing but failing the people I love. I can't fail you too." Ayanna searched his face, looking for the angle, the hidden price, the eventual demand. She was smart enough to know that nothing came free, that men who offered salvation usually wanted something in return. "What will you ask of me?" she said quietly. "As your wife? Nothing you don't want to give." "All men want something." "Then I'm not all men." They stood in the cold, two damaged people trying to decide if trust was possible, if hope was anything more than another kind of cage. Finally, Ayanna spoke. "If I say yes to this marriage, I am choosing it. Not because I have no other option, but because I choose to stay. You understand?" "Yes." "And if I choose to leave later, the door remains open?" "Always." She nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked back to where Nolan stood watching, picked up the child, looked at Clara, who had been silent through all of this. "Your daughter," Ayanna said to Daniel, "what does she think of her father taking an Apache wife?" Daniel knelt beside Clara, his little girl who had not spoken in 8 months, who watched everything with those eyes that understood too much. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Should I marry Ayanna? Should they stay with us?" Clara looked at her father, then at Ayanna and Nalin. Then she did something that made Daniel's heart stop. She walked over to Ayanna and took her hand, placed it in Daniel's hand, joined them together with her small fingers. Then she smiled. The second smile Daniel had seen from his daughter in 8 months. Small and fragile, but real. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears again. She looked down at Clara's small hands joining hers to Daniel's, and something in her expression softened. "Then I choose to stay," she said. "And I choose you, Daniel Frost. Not because your law demands it, but because your daughter asks it, and because you gave me choice when no one else would." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, some locked door opening after years of being sealed shut. "We need to see Reverend Hayes," he said. "Today, before Bridger changes his mind." "Then we go now." They went inside to prepare. Daniel found Sarah's old dress, the blue one she had worn to church. He had packed it away after she died, unable to look at it. Now he pulled it out, shook off the dust, and offered it to Ayanna. She took it with trembling hands, disappeared into the bedroom to change. When she emerged, Daniel's breath caught. The dress fit her differently than it had fit Sarah. Ayanna was smaller, more angular, but in the soft blue fabric with her hair cleaned and her wounds visible, she looked like someone fighting her way back toward being human again. "You look beautiful," Daniel said. Ayanna touched the dress, uncertain. "This was hers, your wife's." "Yes, I think she would want you to have it. You loved her very much." "I did. And now you marry me, a stranger." Daniel met her eyes. "Sarah's last words to me were about taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, about fighting for those who can't fight. I think this is what she meant. I think she'd understand." Ayanna nodded slowly. Then she picked up Nalin, and together the four of them walked out into the cold Wyoming morning. Toward town. Toward Reverend Hayes. Toward a marriage born of necessity, but offered with honesty. Toward a future none of them could yet see, but all of them chose together. The ride to town took an hour through fresh snow. Daniel led his horse with Clara sitting in the saddle while Ayanna walked beside them carrying Nalin. She had refused to ride, and Daniel understood why. After being caged and collared, she needed to feel the ground beneath her feet, needed to know she could walk away if she chose. Broken Ridge looked different in daylight, less menacing, more pathetic. A collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the shadow of Hargrove's mining operation. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people moved along the muddy street, bundled against the cold. They stared as Daniel's group passed. Whispers followed in their wake. By nightfall, everyone in town would know that Daniel Frost had brought the Apache woman to see Reverend Hayes. By tomorrow they would know why. Let them talk. Daniel had stopped caring what small-minded people thought the moment he saw that iron collar. The church sat at the end of Main Street, a simple wooden structure with a crooked cross on top. Beside it stood the Reverend's small house, smoke curling from its chimney. Daniel helped Clara down from the horse, then knocked on the Reverend's door. Reverend Hayes answered, surprise flickering across his weathered face. He was in his shirt sleeves, reading glasses perched on his nose. Behind him, Daniel could see a simple room with a desk piled high with books and papers. "Daniel," Hayes said. Then his eyes moved to Ayanna in Sarah's blue dress, to Nalin in her arms, to Clara standing close to her father. "Come in, all of you, quickly before the cold gets in." They filed into the small front room. Hayes closed the door and gestured to chairs near the fireplace. Ayanna sat carefully as if testing whether she was truly allowed. Nalin remained in her lap, silent and watchful. "I assume this isn't a social call," Hayes said, settling into his own chair. "No," Daniel said. "I need your help, Reverend. I need you to marry us." Hayes went very still. His eyes moved from Daniel to Ayanna and back again. "Marry you to this woman?" "Yes." "Daniel, you buried your wife 8 months ago." "I know exactly how long it's been." "And now you want to marry an Apache woman you've known for, 24 hours?" "Yes." Hayes removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Son, I've known you since you came back from the war. I buried your wife and stood with you when you thought you couldn't go on. So I'm going to ask you this once, and I need an honest answer. Are you doing this because you want to, or because you're running from something?" Daniel had expected the question, had asked it of himself a dozen times during the ride to town. The honest answer was complicated. He was not in love with Ayanna, did not know her well enough for that, but he respected her strength, her dignity, her refusal to break, and he knew that marriage was the only way to protect her under a law designed to strip away her humanity. "Sheriff Bridger came by this morning," Daniel said. "Hargrove filed a complaint, says I stole his property. If I don't have legal papers showing Ayanna is a citizen, Tom has to take her. Send her to the reservation office where they'll auction her off again to settle Sterling's debts. So this is a legal maneuver. It's survival. If she marries me, she becomes a citizen. The law can't touch her then." Hayes looked at Ayanna. "And you, ma'am? You understand what he's proposing?" Ayanna met the Reverend's gaze without flinching. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "I understand that your law sees me as property, that without papers I can be bought and sold like cattle. I understand that marriage to a white man gives me protection I cannot get any other way." She paused. "I also understand that Mr. Frost could have demanded this yesterday, could have made it a condition of my freedom, but he did not. He gave me choice. So now, I choose to stay." "You're choosing to marry a man you barely know." "I am choosing to protect myself and the child I care for. If that requires marriage, then I accept the cost." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to Daniel. "What about Clara? Have you thought about what this means for your daughter, taking an Apache woman as a stepmother?" Daniel looked at his daughter. Clara sat on the floor near Nayland, the two girls playing some quiet game with pebbles they had found. They did not speak, but they communicated, in gestures and glances and the language children created when words failed them. "Clara led me into that warehouse," Daniel said quietly. "She pulled me toward that cage, and when I asked her this morning if Ayanna should stay, she put Ayanna's hand in mine. My daughter has more wisdom than most adults I know." Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "Clayton Hargrove won't accept this quietly. He'll fight. He'll use every ounce of influence he has to break this marriage to take that woman from you. Let him try. You could lose everything, Daniel, your ranch, your reputation, maybe even your freedom if Hargrove pushes the right people. I've already lost everything that mattered. Sarah's gone. My daughter hasn't spoken in 8 months. I've been dead inside for so long I forgot what it felt like to care about something beyond my own grief." Daniel's voice roughened. "Yesterday I opened a cage. Today I'm asking you to help me keep it open. That's all." The Reverend turned from the window. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, Daniel, not a legal trick. If I do this, I need to know you understand what you're entering into. The vows you'll speak are binding, not just in law, but before God." "I understand." Daniel paused, then added quietly, "Sarah made me promise 2 things before she died: to take care of Clara no matter what, and to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. I think this is what she meant. I think marrying Ayanna, protecting her and Nolan, this is how I keep both promises." Hayes looked at Ayanna again. "And you, do you understand?" "I was married before," Ayanna said softly, "to a good man who loved me. He died protecting our children. I know what marriage means. I know what vows are." Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat where the collar had been. "This is different, but I will honor it as if it were the same." Hayes studied them both for a long moment. Then he sighed a sound of resignation and acceptance. "All right, I'll marry you, but not today. Tom Bridger will be back tomorrow," Daniel said urgently. "We don't have time to—" "Tomorrow then, at noon, here in the church." Hayes held up a hand. "I need time to prepare the papers properly, to make sure they're legal and binding. If Hargrove challenges this marriage, we need every detail perfect. Understand?" Daniel wanted to argue, but he recognized wisdom when he heard it. "Tomorrow at noon." "Good. Now go. Both of you need to rest. Tomorrow will be harder than you think." They left the Reverend's house and started back toward the ranch. The afternoon sun was already sinking toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and shadow. By the time they reached home, darkness would be falling. Daniel was helping Clara back onto the horse when a voice stopped him cold. Well, well, the Indian lover and his new bride. Dalton Hargrove stood in the alley beside the general store. Clayton's son, 24 years old and drunk at 3 in the afternoon. Two of his friends flanked him, both looking for trouble. Daniel kept his voice level. "Step aside, Dalton." "Or what? You'll buy me too." Dalton laughed and his friends joined in. "My father's mighty interested in what you're planning, Frost. Mighty interested in making sure it doesn't happen." "Your father can be as interested as he wants. Doesn't change anything." Dalton stepped into the street, blocking their path. Daniel could smell the whiskey on him from 6 feet away. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everything in this town belongs to my father. The mine, the merchants, the sheriff, even the judge when we need him. You really think you can marry some Apache squaw, and that'll protect her?" Daniel's hand moved toward his Colt, not drawing it. Not yet. Just resting there, a warning. But it was Ayanna who spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I am not his squaw," she said clearly. "I am not anyone's property, and the man who tries to make me so will learn what Apache women do to those who cage them." Dalton's face reddened. He took a step forward, but one of his friends grabbed his arm. "Let it go, Dalton. Your father said to watch, not start a fight in the street." "Listen to your friend," Daniel said quietly. "Walk away while you still can." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Dalton spat in the snow at Ayanna's feet and turned away, his friends following. "Tomorrow," he called over his shoulder. "After the wedding, that'll never happen. We'll see who's protected then." They disappeared into the saloon, leaving Daniel and Ayanna standing in the street. "That was foolish," Daniel said quietly. "Antagonizing him. He called me squaw." "I know, but we need to be smart about this. Careful." Ayanna looked at him, and for the first time Daniel saw not just strength in her eyes, but fire. Anger that had been banked for survival, but was still burning underneath. "I have been careful my entire life," she said. "Careful when soldiers came to our village. Careful when they killed my husband and children. Careful when Sterling bought me and put that collar around my neck. I am tired of being careful, Daniel Frost. If I am to be your wife, even in name only, then I will not bow to men like him." Daniel understood. God help him, he understood completely. There was a point where survival stopped being enough, where you needed to stand up even if it meant getting knocked down. He had reached that point himself yesterday at the auction. "All right," he said. "We'll do this your way. But tomorrow after the wedding, we leave town fast. Hargrove won't wait long to make his move." They rode home in silence as darkness fell. When they reached the ranch, Daniel built up the fire while Ayanna prepared a simple meal from the supplies he had bought 2 days ago. Beans and salt pork, bread that was going stale, not much but enough. They ate together, the 4 of them, in silence. Clara and Nolan sat close to each other, sharing a plate. The 2 girls had developed their own language already, a mixture of gestures and glances that needed no words. After dinner, Ayanna took both children to wash up. Daniel sat by the fire cleaning his Colt. The ritual was soothing. Remove the cylinder, check each chamber, clean the barrel, oil the action, reassemble, load. He was testing the hammer when Ayanna returned. The children were already asleep in the bedroom, curled together like puppies seeking warmth. "You expect trouble," she said, nodding at the gun. "I always expect trouble. Keeps me alive." She sat in the chair across from him. In the firelight, wearing Sarah's blue dress, she looked different than she had yesterday. Less broken, more dangerous, like something that had been pressed down, finally pushing back up. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly. Daniel's hands paused on the gun. "Why?" "Because tomorrow I become her replacement. I want to know who she was." "You're not replacing her?" "No." "Then what am I doing?" Daniel set down the Colt and stared into the fire. Sarah was a nurse. We met in Denver before the war. She was strong and stubborn and too good for someone like me. But she married me anyway. He paused. We had 5 good years, built this ranch from nothing, had Clara. Then scarlet fever came through one winter. Sarah nursed everyone she could, even when she started showing symptoms herself. She was brave. She was foolish, kept working until she collapsed. By then it was too late. She died in our bed upstairs, holding my hand. His throat tightened. She made me promise 2 things: to take care of Clara no matter what I learned about her, and to never let cruelty win to fight for those who couldn't fight. I promised. But I couldn't save her. Couldn't do anything except watch her slip away. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. My husband was named Dakota. He was a hunter, the best in our band. Patient and strong, and he made me laugh. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. We had 2 daughters. Ka was 6. Naeli was 4. Nalan isn't yours. No. She is my sister's child. When the soldiers came, my sister hid Nalan in the rocks and told her to be silent. Nalan obeyed. She watched her mother die and did not make a sound. I found her 3 days later, still hiding, still silent. I have cared for her since. What happened to your children? Ayanna's face went carefully blank. Soldiers do not spare Apache children. They are future warriors, future threats. My daughters died quickly at least. Dakota tried to protect them, but there were too many guns. She paused. I survived because I was not there. I was gathering herbs in the forest. When I returned, everyone was dead. Everyone except Nalan. Daniel felt the weight of that story, the guilt of survival, the knowledge that you lived while everyone you loved died. I'm sorry, he said. Sorry does not bring them back. No, it doesn't. They sat in silence, 2 people bound by loss, understanding each other in ways that required no words. Finally, Ayanna spoke again. Tomorrow, when we marry, what will you expect of me? I told you, nothing you don't want to give. All men expect things from their wives. Then I'll say it clearer. This marriage is protection, a legal shield. Nothing more unless you choose to make it more. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't touch you, won't demand anything. You're free to leave whenever you want. And if I choose not to leave, if I choose to stay and be a real wife? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel met her eyes and saw something there he had not expected. Not desire exactly, but curiosity. The beginning of trust, maybe the beginning of something more. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he said quietly. But there's no pressure, no expectations. You understand? Ayanna nodded slowly. Then she stood and walked to the bedroom door, paused with her hand on the handle. Your wife was lucky to have you, she said. I hope tomorrow I can be half as lucky. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Daniel alone with the fire and his thoughts. He sat there for a long time thinking about vows and promises and the strange path his life had taken. Tomorrow he would marry a woman he barely knew, would bind himself to her before God and law. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like betraying Sarah's memory. But it didn't. It felt like the first right thing he had done in 8 months. Morning came too quickly. Daniel woke in the barn to pale light filtering through gaps in the walls. His body ached from another night on hard ground, but his mind was clear. Today was the day. Today he would marry Ayanna and give her the protection of his name. He washed in cold water from the pump, shaved carefully with his straight razor, and put on his only good shirt. The black suit he had worn to Sarah's funeral still hung in the cabin. He would need to wear it again today. The irony was not lost on him. Inside the cabin he found Ayanna already dressed in Sarah's blue dress. She had braided her hair carefully, woven it with a strip of leather. The wounds on her neck were still visible, angry red marks that would scar, but her face was composed, ready. Clara and Nalan sat by the fire, watching everything with serious eyes. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked. "Yes." They rode to town together this time, all four on the horse moving slowly through fresh snow that had fallen during the night. The sky was clear and cold, the kind of winter day that made everything sharp and bright. Broken Ridge was quiet. Most people were at work in the mines or closed up in their homes against the cold, but Daniel saw curtains twitch as they passed, saw faces in windows. The town was watching. At the church, Reverend Hayes waited. He had opened the building and lit candles along the walls. The small space glowed with warm light. Inside, Daniel was surprised to find they were not alone. Ruth Morrison stood near the altar wearing her best dress. Beside her was Jack Sullivan, Daniel's old friend from the war. Both had come to witness. "I hope you don't mind," Hayes said. "The law requires 2 witnesses, and I thought you might want friendly faces." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. He had expected to do this alone with only the Reverend and his own conscience as witnesses, but having Ruth and Jack here seeing their support made the moment feel less like a desperate legal maneuver and more like something real. "Thank you," he said to them both. Ruth smiled. "Your Sarah was my friend Daniel. She'd want this. She'd want you to help someone who needs it." The ceremony was brief. No music, no flowers, no crowd of well-wishers. Just 6 people standing in a small church that smelled of candle wax and old wood. Hayes read from his Bible, the familiar words of the marriage service echoing in the quiet space. Daniel barely heard them. All his attention was on Ayanna standing beside him, her hand small and trembling in his. "Do you, Daniel James Frost, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" Daniel thought about Sarah, about the vows he had made to her 17 years ago, about whether she would approve of this. Then he heard her voice in his memory clear as day. "Don't let cruelty win. Fight for those who can't fight." "I do," he said. Hayes turned to Ayanna. "And do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Ayanna looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were bright, whether with tears or hope he could not tell. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." This was it, the moment that would seal everything. Daniel leaned down slowly, giving Ayanna every chance to pull away. She did not. Instead, she rose to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Ruth was wiping her eyes. Jack was grinning. Hayes looked satisfied. "Congratulations," the Reverend said. "May God bless your union and give you strength for the road ahead." They signed the marriage certificate. Ruth and Jack added their signatures as witnesses. Hayes filled in the date, January 6, 1877. The ink was still wet when Daniel folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat. This was their armor now, this piece of paper and the vows they had spoken. Not much to stand against Clayton Hargrove's money and influence, but it was something. It was hope. Outside the church, Ruth hugged Ayanna tightly. "You take care of each other," she said. "And if you need anything, you come find me." "Thank you," Ayanna said softly. Jack shook Daniel's hand. "You need help, you call on me. I still remember how to shoot straight. I hope it doesn't come to that." "So do I. But hoping and preparing are 2 different things." They were about to mount the horse when Sheriff Bridger appeared at the end of the street. He rode toward them slowly, deliberately. Behind him came 2 riders Daniel did not recognize, hard men with guns on their hips. "Daniel," Bridger said when he got close. "Mrs. Frost." The use of Ayanna's new name was deliberate, an acknowledgement. "Tom," Daniel said carefully. "I came to see the papers. Make sure everything is legal." Daniel pulled out the marriage certificate and handed it over. Bridger examined it closely, looking for any flaw, but Hayes had filled it out perfectly. Every line complete, every signature witnessed. completely legal. "This seems to be in order," Bridger said finally. He handed the paper back. "Then we're done here. For now." The sheriff's eyes moved to the two men behind him. "But Mr. Hargrove asked me to deliver a message. He says this marriage won't protect you, says there are other ways to handle things." "Is that a threat?" "It's a message. What you do with it is your business." Bridger turned his horse. "Go home, Daniel. Keep your head down. And pray that Hargrove gets tired of this game before someone gets hurt." The sheriff rode away, the two hard men following. But Daniel saw them look back, saw them memorizing faces, measuring distances. Trouble was coming. The only question was when. The ride home from town felt longer than it should have. Daniel kept checking over his shoulder, watching for riders following them. The two hard men with Sheriff Bridger had looked like the kind who got paid to make problems disappear. He had seen their type during the war. Men who killed for money and slept just fine afterward. Clara sat in front of him on the saddle, her small body tense. She felt it too, the electricity in the air, the sense that something was shifting, that the world was about to tip sideways. Ayanna walked beside the horse, carrying Nalin. She had insisted again on walking, needing to feel the ground beneath her feet. But Daniel noticed she stayed closer to the horse now, closer to him. Whatever independence she valued, she was not foolish enough to ignore danger. When they finally crested the hill above the ranch, Daniel reined in the horse. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, that sixth sense developed during the war that told you when death was close. The cabin looked untouched. Smoke still rose from the chimney where he had banked the fire that morning. The barn stood as it always had, sagging slightly but whole. Nothing seemed out of place, but something was different. "What is it?" Ayanna asked quietly. "I don't know. Stay here." He dismounted and handed Clara down to Ayanna. Drew his Colt from its holster. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. He had not fired this gun in anger since the war, but his hands remembered. He approached the cabin slowly, eyes scanning. The snow around the door was disturbed. Boot prints, fresh ones. Someone had been here within the last hour. Daniel pushed open the door with his foot gun raised. The cabin was empty, but things had been moved. His papers were scattered across the table. Drawers hung open. Someone had been searching for something. On the table, pinned under his coffee cup, was a note. Daniel picked it up with his free hand. "The marriage changes nothing. She belongs to the Sterling estate by law. The child, too. You have until tomorrow to bring them to the sheriff's office. After that, we come get them ourselves. And when we do, your ranch burns, your cattle die, maybe your daughter, too, if she gets in the way." There was no signature. There did not need to be. This had Clayton Hargrove written all over it. Daniel crumpled the note in his fist. Rage flooded through him, hot and sudden. He had tried to do this the right way. Had married Ayanna legally, properly, following every rule of their corrupt system. And still they came with threats. Still they treated her like property to be seized. He stepped back outside. Ayanna was watching him, Nalin in her arms, Clara beside her. All three waiting for him to tell them what came next. "They were here," Daniel said, "searching the cabin. They left a threat." "What kind of threat?" "The kind that means we can't stay here tonight." Ayanna's jaw tightened. "Where can we go?" Daniel thought quickly. The ranch was too exposed, too easy to surround. Town was Hargrove's territory. The reservation was days away, and Ayanna would be detained the moment they arrived. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere Hargrove's men would not think to look. "Ruth Morrison's boarding house," he said. "In town. I know it seems crazy to go back, but Hargrove won't expect it. And Ruth has a shotgun. She knows how to use it. You trust her. With my life, with Clara's life, with yours." Ayanna studied his face, measuring his certainty. Then she nodded. "Then we go." They rode back to town as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The temperature was dropping fast. By nightfall it would be well below freezing. Daniel pushed the horse as hard as he dared, wanting to reach safety before full dark. Ruth Morrison's boarding house sat at the quiet end of Main Street, a two-story structure that had seen better days but was well maintained. Ruth ran it herself since her husband died at Gettysburg, taking in travelers and miners who needed a clean bed and decent food. Daniel had known her since he first came to Broken Ridge. She had been Sarah's closest friend, had sat with them during those terrible 3 days when the fever took Clara's mother. If anyone in this town could be trusted, it was Ruth. He knocked on the door 3 times. Quick, urgent. The signal they had agreed on years ago during a winter when claim jumpers had terrorized the area. A signal that meant trouble. Ruth opened the door immediately. Her eyes widened when she saw them, but she stepped back without hesitation. "Inside! Quickly!" They filed into the warm front room. Ruth closed and locked the door behind them, then pulled the curtains shut. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel told her everything. The note, the threat, the timeline they had been given. Ruth's face went hard. "That son of a bitch. Pardon my language, but Clayton Hargrove is a cancer on this town. Can we stay here tonight? I know it's asking a lot, but you can stay as long as you need. I've got 2 empty rooms upstairs. You and Ayanna can take one, the girls can share the other." She paused. "My Emma's at her aunt's for the week, so we've got space." "Thank you." Ruth looked at Ayanna. "You're safe here, child. Anyone comes through that door looking for trouble, they'll find my husband's shotgun instead." Ayanna nodded, unable to speak. The kindness was almost harder to bear than the cruelty had been. Ruth showed them upstairs. The rooms were simple but clean, real beds with real mattresses, a wash basin with clean water. Luxuries Daniel had almost forgotten existed. "There's stew on the stove downstairs," Ruth said. "Come down when you're ready. We'll eat together." She left them alone. Daniel stood in the small room, suddenly aware that this was his wedding night, that he and Ayanna were expected to share this space, this bed. The thought filled him with equal parts anxiety and something else he could not name. Ayanna seemed to be thinking the same thing. She stood by the window looking out at the street below. "I can sleep on the floor," Daniel said quietly. "Or in the girls' room. Whatever makes you comfortable." "We are married now," Ayanna said without turning. "People will expect us to share a bed." "I don't care what people expect." She turned to face him. "But I do. If we are to convince your town that this marriage is real, we must act as husband and wife. Otherwise, Hargrove will use it against us. Will say the marriage is false." Daniel knew she was right. But the thought of lying beside her, of sharing that intimacy even without touching, felt like a betrayal of something he could not articulate. "All right," he said finally. "But I'll stay on top of the covers. Give you space." "You are a strange man, Daniel Frost." "How so?" "You have the legal right to demand anything of me. I am your wife now, and yet you ask for nothing. That's not how marriage should work. That is not how most marriages work." Before Daniel could respond, Clara appeared in the doorway. Behind her stood Nayland. The 2 girls had been inseparable since yesterday, communicating in their silent language. Clara walked to her father and tugged on his sleeve, pointed downstairs, the universal signal for food. "All right, sweetheart, let's eat." Dinner was quiet but nourishing. Ruth's stew was thick with vegetables and meat served with fresh bread that was still warm from the oven. The 4 of them ate together at the kitchen table while Ruth moved around preparing tomorrow's breakfast. After the meal, Ruth took the girls upstairs to prepare them for bed. Daniel and Ayanna remained at the table, neither quite ready to face the awkwardness of the bedroom upstairs. "I need to tell you something," Ayanna said suddenly. "About Nalin." "All right. I told you she was my sister's child." "That is true. But there is more." She paused, gathering courage. "My sister was married to a white man, a trapper named John Whitfield. He loved her, truly loved her, and when the soldiers came he tried to protect her. They killed him first, made her watch. Then they killed her." Daniel felt ice forming in his chest. "Nayland is half white. Yes, her father was a good man. But his whiteness did not save her mother, did not save him. The soldiers cared only that my sister was Apache." Ayanna's voice roughened. "Nalin has his eyes, his coloring. She could pass for white if she learned to hide her mother's blood. But I will not ask that of her. I will not teach her to be ashamed. You shouldn't have to. But I may need to. If Hargrove takes her, if they send her to one of those schools where they beat the Indian out of children, she will need to know how to survive, how to hide what she is. Daniel reached across the table and took Ayanna's hand. She stiffened at the contact but did not pull away. "No one is taking her," he said. "No one is taking you. I promised you protection and I meant it. You cannot fight the whole world, Daniel. Maybe not. But I can fight this town. I can fight Hargrove." Before Ayanna could respond, there was a knock at the back door. 3 quick raps, then 2, then 1. Ruth appeared from the front room, shotgun in hand. "That's Jack's signal." She opened the door. Jack Sullivan stood there, snow dusting his shoulders. His face was grim. "You need to hear this," he said. "All of you." They gathered in the kitchen. Jack removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a nervous gesture Daniel had never seen from him before. "I was at the saloon tonight, listening. Hargrove's men were there drinking and talking loud. They've got a plan." "What kind of plan?" Daniel asked. "They're not waiting until tomorrow. They're coming tonight. Plan is to burn Ruth's boarding house with all of you inside. Make it look like an accident. A lamp knocked over maybe. Winter fire. Tragic." Ruth went pale. "They'd burn my house, kill children." "They would and they will if we don't stop them." Jack looked at Daniel. "They're waiting for the town to go to sleep. Probably around midnight. That gives us maybe 3 hours." Daniel's mind raced. They could run, but where? Into the winter night with 2 small children, they would freeze before morning. They could try to reach his ranch, but it was too far and too exposed. They could make a stand here, but that meant putting Ruth in danger. "There's another option," Ayanna said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We go to them first," she continued. "We do not wait like rabbits in a hole. We hunt." "You want to attack Hargrove?" Jack asked, incredulous. "I want to end this, tonight, before more blood is spilled." She looked at Daniel. "You said you would fight for me. So fight, not defensively, not hiding. Fight like a warrior fights. Strike first." Daniel felt something shift inside him. She was right. Every instinct told him she was right. Waiting, hiding, running, these were the actions of prey, and prey always got caught eventually. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. Ayanna's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "Hargrove expects us to be afraid. To cower, we use that. We make him think we are running, draw his men out, and then we take them." "That's suicide," Ruth said. "There's only 2 of you. Hargrove has 12 men." "3 of us," Jack said. "I'm not sitting this out." "4," said a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Reverend Hayes standing there. He had entered through the front door so quietly none of them had heard. In his hands he held an old rifle, well maintained and ready. "Reverend," Daniel started, "you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I married you 2 this morning, made you husband and wife before God. That means I have a responsibility to see that union protected." Hayes set the rifle on the table. "I was a soldier before I was a preacher, Daniel. I haven't forgotten how to fight, especially when the cause is just." Daniel looked around the table. At Jack, his old war companion. At Hayes, who had buried his wife and now stood ready to fight for his new one. At Ruth, fierce and protective. At Ayanna, who had survived horrors he could barely imagine and was now ready to become the hunter instead of the hunted. "All right," he said. "We fight, but we do it smart. We hit them where they don't expect when they don't expect. And we end this tonight." They planned quickly. Jack knew where Hargrove's men gathered before their dirty work, an old mining shack at the edge of town, far enough from respectable folks that screams would not carry. That would be their target. But first, they needed to set the bait. Daniel wrote a note in deliberately shaky handwriting. "We're leaving town tonight, taking the North Trail to the reservation. Please don't follow us. We just want peace." He left it on the boarding house table where anyone breaking in would find it. Then they prepared. Ruth stayed behind with the girls. She barricaded the doors and loaded her shotgun. If anyone came for the children, they would find a woman who had lost her husband to war and had nothing left to lose. The other four moved through the darkness toward the mining shack. The temperature had dropped to brutal levels. Daniel's breath formed thick clouds. His fingers were already going numb despite his gloves. They approached from different directions. Daniel from the east, Jack from the west, Hayes from the south, Ayanna against everyone's protests from the north. She had refused to stay behind. This was her fight as much as anyone's. Through the grimy window of the shack, Daniel could see them. 8 men gathered around a potbelly stove, passing a bottle. Hargrove's hired guns, waiting for the signal to burn down the boarding house. He recognized 2 of them from this morning, the hard men who had ridden with Sheriff Bridger. The others were strangers, but all carried the same look: killers for hire. Daniel waited for the signal. 3 owl hoots. Hayes's signal that everyone was in position. 1 hoot, 2, 3. Daniel kicked in the door. For a moment frozen in time, 8 men turned to stare at him. 8 hands reached for 8 guns. "Evening, boys," Daniel said. Then all hell broke loose. He dove left as the first shots rang out. Wood splintered where he had been standing. He came up firing his Colt, barking twice. 1 man went down clutching his shoulder, another dropped his gun and dove for cover. Jack burst through the back door, rifle already firing. The boom of the long gun in the enclosed space was deafening. Another man fell. Hayes came through the window glass, shattering around him. His old rifle spoke with authority. Methodical, practiced, deadly. And then Ayanna was there, moving like smoke. She had no gun, but in her hand was a knife. Daniel did not know where she had gotten it, did not have time to wonder. She moved with brutal efficiency, striking at knees and hamstrings, disabling rather than killing, making them hurt, making them pay. The fight lasted maybe 90 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 6 men were down, 1 dead from Jack's rifle, 5 wounded and disarmed. 2 had fled out the front door into the night. Daniel's ears rang. His hands shook, but he was alive. They were all alive. Ayanna stood over one of the wounded men, her knife at his throat. Blood dripped from the blade. Not his blood, someone else's. "Where is Hargrove?" she demanded. The man stared at her with wide eyes. "I don't." She pressed the knife deeper. "Where?" "His estate, the big house on the hill. But you can't. Watch me." She stood and walked to the door. Daniel followed, catching her arm. "Ayanna, wait. We can't just—" "They were going to burn us alive," she said, her voice cold as the winter night. "They were going to kill children. And you want me to wait? I want you to think. If we go after Hargrove now, we become murderers. We become what he is. I am already what he made me." Daniel saw something in her eyes then. Something broken and furious and beyond reason. She had been pushed too far, bent too much. She was about to snap. He did the only thing he could think of. He pulled her close and held her tight. For a moment she fought him. Then she collapsed against his chest, shaking. Not crying, just shaking with the force of rage and fear and everything she had been holding inside. "I know," Daniel whispered. "I know you want blood. I know you deserve it. But not like this. Not in rage. We do this right or we don't do it at all." When she finally pulled back, her eyes had cleared. The fury was still there, but controlled now, focused. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "We get the law. The real law. There's a U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. We send word tonight. Get him here. He can arrest Hargrove properly, legally. Make it stick. And if Hargrove runs before the Marshal arrives, then we hunt him. But we do it clean." Ayanna studied his face. Then she nodded slowly. "All right. We do it your way. But if he runs Daniel Frost, I will find him. And I will not be merciful. I wouldn't expect you to be." They left the wounded men for Sheriff Bridger to collect. Jack agreed to ride to Cheyenne immediately to bring back the Marshal. Hayes would stay with Ruth and the girls, protecting them. Daniel and Ayanna returned to the boarding house as snow began to fall again, heavy, thick flakes that would cover their tracks by morning. Upstairs they found the girls sleeping peacefully. Ruth sat in a chair between the beds, shotgun across her lap. "It's done?" she asked quietly. "For tonight," Daniel said. Ruth nodded and left them alone. Daniel and Ayanna stood in the small bedroom they would share. The bed loomed between them, innocent and terrifying. "I meant what I said," Daniel told her. "I'll sleep on the floor, or in the hall, whatever you need." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment. Then she began unbuttoning Sarah's blue dress. "We are married," she said simply, "and I am tired of being afraid, tired of letting fear make my choices. If I am to share your name, I will share your bed, not out of obligation, but because I choose to." Daniel's heart hammered. "Ayanna, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That is why I want to." She let the dress fall and stood before him in her undergarments. Her body was marked with scars, evidence of a life lived hard, but she was beautiful and brave, and choosing him. Daniel had not touched a woman since Sarah died, had not wanted to, but now looking at Ayanna, he felt something stir. Not just desire, but something deeper, connection, understanding, the beginning of love. He crossed to her slowly, gave her every chance to change her mind, but she did not step back. When he kissed her, it was gentle, careful, a question rather than a demand. She answered by pulling him closer. They made love slowly, carefully learning each other's bodies and boundaries. It was nothing like it had been with Sarah. This was different, rawer, more honest. Two broken people trying to make each other whole. Afterward they lay tangled together beneath the quilts. Outside, snow fell steadily. Inside, for the first time in months, Daniel felt something like peace. "Thank you," Ayanna whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For giving me choice. Always choice." Daniel pulled her closer. "Always," he promised. And as sleep took them both, neither noticed the shadow that passed beneath their window, the figure that had watched the boarding house all night. Clayton Hargrove smiled in the darkness and walked back toward his estate. The game was not over. Not by a long shot. Daniel woke to pale dawn light filtering through the curtains. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he felt the warmth of another body beside him and remembered everything. The wedding, the threat, the fight at the mining shack. Ayanna. She was still asleep, curled against his side, her breathing deep and even. In sleep the hardness left her face. She looked younger, more vulnerable. Daniel resisted the urge to touch her hair, not wanting to wake her. His body ached from the fight last night. His knuckles were bruised, his shoulder throbbed where he had hit the ground dodging bullets. But they were alive. All of them. That was what mattered. He slipped carefully from the bed and dressed in the cold room. Through the window he could see Main Street below. The town was just beginning to stir. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few early risers moved along the boardwalks. Everything looked normal, peaceful, as if last night had never happened. Daniel knew better. The calm was deceptive. Hargrove would not let this stand, would not accept defeat. Men like him never did. A soft knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Ruth standing there with a cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said quietly. He took it gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, burning away the last of the night's chill. "The girls are still asleep," Ruth continued. "I checked on them an hour ago, both peaceful as can be. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet. Sheriff Bridger came by before dawn. He found the men at the mining shack, wanted to know what happened." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Told him I was asleep all night, didn't hear a thing. But Daniel, he knows. He's not stupid. He knows you were involved." "Is he going to arrest me?" Ruth shook her head. "I don't think so." He looked relieved, honestly, like maybe someone finally stood up to Hargrove and he didn't have to be the one to do it. "But he warned me. Said things are about to get worse before they get better." "Did he say how?" "No. Just that Hargrove is furious. That he's calling in favors from men who owe him. That the fight last night was just the beginning." Daniel sipped his coffee and thought. Jack had ridden for Cheyenne last night, would not return with the marshal for at least 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather turned bad. They needed to survive until then, needed to keep Ayanna and the children safe while Hargrove marshaled his forces. "We can't stay here," he said. "It puts you at risk." "Where will you go?" "Your ranch is too exposed." "I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out." Behind him he heard movement. Turned to find Ayanna awake, sitting up in bed with the quilt pulled around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, falling around her face. She looked at him with eyes that remembered everything from last night, both the violence and the tenderness. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning. Ruth brought coffee." "I heard." Ayanna rose and dressed quickly, efficiently. No modesty, no shame, just practical movement. When she was ready, she joined them in the hallway. "What is the plan?" Daniel told her about Bridger's visit, about the need to move. Ayanna listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There is a place," she said finally, "in the mountains, a cave my people used when we needed to hide from soldiers. It is remote, difficult to reach, but safe." "How far?" "Half a day's ride, maybe less if we push hard." Daniel considered. A cave in winter with 2 small children was not ideal, but it was defensible, hidden, and temporary. They only needed to survive 3 more days. "All right. We'll go today, as soon as the girls wake." "I'm coming with you," Ruth said. "Ruth, no. You have your business here, your life. My business can wait, and my life isn't worth much if I let friends face danger alone." She crossed her arms, the same stubborn gesture Daniel had seen her use on her late husband. "Besides, someone needs to cook. You boys would starve in a week." Despite everything, Daniel smiled. "Thank you." They woke the children gently. Clara and Nayland seemed to understand without words that they were leaving again. They dressed quickly and ate the breakfast Ruth prepared. Oatmeal with honey, strong tea, enough to sustain them for the cold ride ahead. Daniel was loading supplies onto the horse when Reverend Hayes arrived at the back door. "I heard you're leaving," the Reverend said. "Thought you might need this." He handed Daniel a leather bag. Inside were provisions: dried meat, hardtack coffee, and something else. A small Bible. "For strength," Hayes said. "The food kind and the spiritual kind." "Thank you, Reverend. There's something else you should know. Judge Webb left town this morning, took the first stage out. Word is he's headed to the territorial capital to resign his position before he can be removed. One less of Hargrove's men to worry about? Maybe. But it also means Hargrove is losing control. And desperate men do desperate things." Hayes paused. "Watch yourself out there, Daniel. And watch her." He nodded toward Ayanna, who was helping the girls onto the horse. "She's stronger than she looks. But strength can break if it's tested too hard." They left Broken Ridge as the sun climbed toward noon. Daniel rode with Clara in front of him. Ruth rode behind on a borrowed horse with Nalin. Ayanna walked, leading them along paths only she remembered. The trail climbed steadily into the foothills. Snow lay thick here, untouched and pristine. Their horses struggled through drifts that came up to their knees. Progress was slow, but Ayanna knew where she was going. She moved with confidence, following landmarks invisible to Daniel's eyes. A particular tree, a rock formation, the way the wind carved the snow. They stopped once to rest the horses and let the children stretch. Clara and Nayland played in the snow, making shapes with their hands, still not speaking but communicating in their private language. "How much farther?" Daniel asked Ayanna. 2 more hours, maybe 3. The cave is hidden. My people chose it because soldiers could ride past and never see it." "Will there be shelter from the wind?" "Yes, and a spring nearby that never freezes. We will have water." Ruth joined them, her cheeks red from the cold. "Those girls are amazing." Not a complaint between them. "My Emma would have been crying an hour ago." "They have learned that crying does not help," Ayanna said quietly. "They have learned to endure." Ruth studied the younger woman. "You've endured too much already." When this is over, when Hargrove is dealt with, you deserve peace. I do not know what peace looks like anymore. Then we'll teach you, all of us together. They continued climbing. The air grew thinner, colder. Daniel's lungs burned with each breath, but Ayanna pressed on tireless as the mountains themselves. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, she stopped. There, she said, pointing. Daniel looked but saw nothing except rock and snow and scrub pine. I don't see it. That is the point. Come. She led them around an outcropping of stone. Behind it, hidden from the trail, was a narrow opening, a crack in the mountain face barely wide enough for a horse to pass through sideways. They dismounted and led the animals through. On the other side, the crack opened into a small canyon, and at the back of the canyon, sheltered beneath an overhang of rock, was the cave. It was perfect, large enough for all of them and the horses, high enough to stand upright, and most importantly, invisible from any approach unless you knew exactly where to look. Your people were wise, Daniel said. My people were hunted. Wisdom came from necessity. They unloaded the horses and made camp inside the cave. Ruth built a small fire near the entrance where the smoke would dissipate among the rocks. The warmth was immediate and welcome. The girls explored the cave with the fearlessness of children, found old drawings on the walls, handprints in ochre and charcoal, evidence that Ayanna's people had used this place for generations. As darkness fell outside, they gathered around the fire. Ruth made coffee and heated beans from their supplies. Simple food, but it tasted like luxury after the cold ride. How long can we stay here? Ruth asked. As long as we need to, Daniel said. Jack should be back with the marshal in 3 days, maybe sooner if he pushes hard. And if Hargrove finds us before then, he won't. This place is too well hidden. But even as Daniel said it, he felt doubt creeping in. Hargrove had resources, men, money, determination. If he wanted them badly enough, would he find a way? That night, after the children were asleep and Ruth had settled into her blankets, Daniel sat watch at the cave entrance. Ayanna joined him wrapped in a heavy blanket. You do not need to keep watch, she said. No one followed us. Probably not, but I learned in the war that probably is how men die. You were a soldier, medic. I didn't carry a gun most of the time, just bandages and hope. He paused. I saw a lot of men die, some from bullets, most from infection and disease. I learned that the biggest threats aren't always the ones you can see coming. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. My husband was a warrior. He said the same thing, that the enemy you know is less dangerous than the one you don't. What was his name again? Takota. It means friend to all. A sad smile touched her lips. He lived up to his name. Even the white trappers respected him. He never started fights, but he never backed down either. How did you meet him? He brought meat to my mother after my father died, every week for a year, never asking for anything, just providing. My mother told me he would make a good husband. She was right. Daniel heard the grief beneath her words, the love that death had not erased. Do you regret marrying me? He asked quietly. Taking vows with someone you don't love. Ayanna turned to look at him. In the firelight her eyes were dark and unreadable. I do not love you, she said. Not yet, but I respect you, trust you. That is more than many wives can say about their husbands. And last night I chose to be with you, not from duty or fear, but because I wanted to. Because you gave me the power to choose, and I chose you. She paused. Is that not enough? It's more than enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, wind howled through the canyon. Snow began to fall again, heavy and thick. There is something I need to tell you, Ayanna said suddenly. About Clara. Daniel tensed. What about her? She is not your daughter. The words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment he could not breathe, could not think. What did you say? I see it in her face, in her coloring. She has your wife's features, yes, but not yours. Someone else fathered her. Daniel's mind reeled. He thought about Sarah's last words, about the letter she had tried to write, about her insistence that he promised to care for Clara no matter what he learned. "How can you know that?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because I know what it looks like when a mother hides her child's true parentage. My sister did the same with Naylan. Loved a white man, bore his child, tried to protect them both from a world that would punish them for existing." Ayana's voice softened. "I do not say this to hurt you, Daniel. I say it because secrets have a way of surfacing, and I would rather you hear it from me than discover it in some cruel way later." Daniel stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the cave, looked out at the falling snow, and tried to process what she had just told him. Clara was not his daughter, not by blood, which meant Sarah had been with someone else before they married, or maybe during their marriage. The thought made him sick. But then he remembered his little girl's face, the way she looked at him with complete trust, the way she had taken his hand after Sarah died and held on like he was the only solid thing in her world. Blood did not make a father. Love did, and he loved Clara with everything in him. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "What?" He turned to face Ayana. "It doesn't matter who her biological father is. I'm the one who raised her, who sat up with her when she had nightmares, who taught her to ride, who held her when her mother died. That makes me her father, the only one that counts." Ayana stood and walked to him, placed a hand on his chest over his heart. "That is why I told you," she said. "Because I knew you would say that. Because you are a better man than most. And because Clara deserves a father who loves her for who she is, not who he thinks she should be." Daniel pulled her close, held her in the darkness while snow fell and wind howled, and somewhere far away their enemies plotted. "Thank you," he whispered, "for telling me, for trusting me with the truth. We are married now. Marriage should be built on truth even when truth is difficult." They stood together at the cave's edge, two people learning to trust, learning to build something new from the ruins of what they had lost. The next morning brought clear skies and brutal cold. Daniel woke to find Ayana already up checking the surrounding area for tracks. She moved like a ghost through the snow, silent and efficient. She returned to the cave with a grim expression. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "Tracks, fresh ones. A single rider. He circled the canyon twice, then rode away." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Someone found us. Or found signs that we passed this way. The tracks do not come close to the cave entrance, but they know we are in this area." "How long ago?" "Last night, while we slept." Daniel cursed himself for falling asleep, for not maintaining watch properly. Ruth emerged from deeper in the cave, the children behind her. "What's wrong?" "We need to move," Daniel said. "Now." "But you said we were safe here." "I was wrong." They broke camp quickly, efficiently, loaded the horses with trembling hands. The children sensed the urgency and stayed quiet, watching with wide eyes. Daniel was checking the saddle straps when Clara tugged on his sleeve. She pointed toward the canyon entrance. Riders. 4 of them, blocking the only way out. Daniel's hand went to his Colt. Beside him, Ruth cocked her shotgun. Ayana pulled Naylan close and drew her knife. The riders advanced slowly, confident. They had their prey trapped, and they knew it. The lead rider was Victor Kane Hargrove's most trusted enforcer, a man Daniel recognized from town. Behind him rode 3 others, all armed with rifles. "Morning Frost," Kane called out. "You and your Apache bride are coming with us. Mr. Hargrove wants a word." "Tell Hargrove to go to hell." Kane smiled. "He said you'd say that. Said to tell you we can do this easy or hard. Easy you come peaceful, and the women and children don't get hurt. Hard we take you by force, and what happens to them isn't our concern." Daniel's mind raced. They were outgunned and trapped. The cave was defensible, but they could be starved out. Running deeper into the mountains with children in winter was suicide. He needed a miracle. And then Ayana stepped forward. "I will go with you," she said clearly. If you let the others leave safely." "No," Daniel said. "Absolutely not." She turned to him, and he saw resolve in her eyes. Resolve and something else. A plan. "Trust me," she whispered. Then louder to Cain, "I will come willingly. But the child Nayland stays here. And you swear on your life that you will not harm these people." Cain considered. "Mr. Hargrove wants you specifically. He don't care much about the others." "All right. You come peaceful, we let them go." "Ayanna, don't do this," Daniel pleaded. She touched his face gently. "Remember what I said last night about choice. This is mine." Before he could stop her, she walked toward the riders. Cain dismounted and grabbed her arm roughly. Started to bind her hands. And that was when Ayanna moved. She twisted in his grip faster than a snake. Her knife flashed. Cain screamed and fell back, clutching his arm where she had cut him. Deep. Disabling. The other riders reached for their weapons. But Daniel was already moving. His colt barked twice. One rider fell, another dove for cover. Ruth's shotgun boomed. A rider's horse reared and threw him. Ayanna was on Cain before he could recover, her knife at his throat, her voice cold as winter. "Tell Hargrove this," she said. "Tell him the hunted has become the hunter. Tell him I am coming for him, and when I find him I will show him what it means to cage an Apache woman." She pressed the knife deeper. A thin line of blood appeared. "Tell him," she repeated. "I'll tell him." Cain gasped. She released him and stood. Cain scrambled backward, climbed onto his horse with one hand. The other riders who could still move did the same. They fled down the canyon, leaving their dead behind. Ayanna watched them go. Then she turned to Daniel. "Now," she said, "we finish this." They did not return to the cave. It was compromised now, known to Hargrove's men. Instead, Ayanna led them deeper into the mountains, following paths that existed only in her memory. Paths her people had used for generations to disappear when the world became too dangerous. By nightfall, they had found another shelter. Not a cave this time, but an abandoned trapper's cabin wedged into a narrow valley. The roof sagged and snow had drifted through gaps in the walls, but it had 4 walls and a stone fireplace. It would do. Ruth got a fire going while Daniel checked the perimeter. No tracks. No signs of pursuit. Cain and his men had gone back to Hargrove, carrying Ayanna's message and their wounded pride. Inside, the children huddled near the fire. Clara had not left Nahlin's side since the confrontation at the cave. The 2 girls clung to each other, drawing strength from their silent bond. Ayanna stood at the window watching the darkness. Her knife was still in her hand, blood cleaned from the blade, but her grip tight. Ready. "You could have gotten yourself killed," Daniel said quietly, joining her. "I could have, but I did not." That was reckless. She turned to look at him. "Was it, or was it the only way to make Hargrove understand that I am not prey, that I will not be taken quietly?" Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that there were better ways, safer ways. But he knew she was right. Men like Hargrove only understood strength, only responded to force. "When Cain tells him what happened, Hargrove will come himself," Daniel said. "He won't send hired men again. He'll want to finish this personally." "Good. Let him come. I am ready." Before Daniel could respond, they heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast through the snow. Daniel's hand went to his colt. Ruth cocked her shotgun. Ayanna positioned herself between the door and the children, but the voice that called out was familiar. "Daniel, it's Jack, don't shoot." Daniel opened the door. Jack Sullivan sat his horse in the moonlight breath, steaming. Behind him rode 2 others. One was a tall man in his 50s wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. The other was Reverend Hayes. "Jack," Daniel said, "you made good time. Rode through the night. This is Marshal William Grant out of Cheyenne." Jack dismounted. "And I brought the Reverend because I figured we could use all the help we can get." Marshal Grant dismounted and approached. He had iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by small-town corruption. He looked at Daniel, then at Ayanna, then at the shabby cabin behind them. "Mr. Frost," Mrs. Frost, I've heard quite a story from Mr. Sullivan here about illegal auctions and death threats and a powerful man who thinks he's above the law. It's all true, Marshal. Marshal Grant dismounted and approached. Mr. Frost, Mrs. Frost, I've heard quite a story from Mr. Sullivan here about illegal auctions and death threats and a powerful man who thinks he's above the law. It's all true, Marshal. I'm sure it is. Grant's eyes hardened. But there's something else. Something Mr. Sullivan didn't know to tell me. I've been investigating Clayton Hargrove for 2 years, and in my investigation I came across something troubling. A death 8 months ago. Sarah Frost, your wife. Daniel went very still. She died of scarlet fever. Did she? Grant pulled out a folded paper. I had the wagon examined by a federal investigator. The wheel that broke wasn't worn down. It was sawed partway through, deliberately. Someone wanted that wagon to fail. The world tilted. Daniel couldn't breathe. Your wife worked as a nurse at Hargrove's mine before you married, Grant continued. She kept records, water samples, evidence that Hargrove was poisoning the water supply to drive Apache families off land he wanted to buy. She was going to testify against him. No, Daniel whispered. That's impossible. She died of fever. I saw her. You saw her after the wagon accident. Fever set in from her injuries. But the accident wasn't an accident, Mr. Frost. Your wife was murdered, by order of Clayton Hargrove. I'm sure it is. I've dealt with men like Clayton Hargrove before. They're a disease in these territories, corrupt everything they touch. Grant's eyes hardened. But I'm going to need evidence, witnesses, something that'll stand up in a federal court. We have witnesses, Daniel said. Ruth Morrison here saw the auction. Reverend Hayes performed our marriage, and Kane and his men attacked us today in the mountains. Victor Kane Hargrove's enforcer. The same. He's got a knife wound on his arm from my wife. That should be fresh evidence. Grant nodded slowly. All right, here's what we're going to do. We ride back to Broken Ridge at first light. I arrest Hargrove on federal charges. Kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy. We do this by the book, legal and proper. No vigilante justice, no revenge killings. We let the law work the way it's supposed to. Ayanna stepped forward. And if Hargrove resists, if he fights, then we fight back. But we do it legally. With badges and warrants and witnesses. Grant looked at her directly. I know you've suffered, ma'am. I know you want blood, but blood won't give you peace. Justice will. Justice did not save my husband, did not save my children. No, it didn't. And I'm sorry for that. But becoming a killer won't bring them back either. It'll just make you the same as the men who took them from you. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Daniel could see the war happening inside her, the desire for vengeance against the need for something better, something clean. All right, she said finally. We do it your way, Marshal. But if Hargrove runs, if he tries to escape, I will hunt him, and I will not be gentle. Fair enough. They spent the night in the cramped cabin. 7 people and 2 children packed tight for warmth. But there was comfort in numbers, in knowing that the law had finally arrived. Daniel lay awake long after the others slept, Ayanna curled against his side. He thought about tomorrow, about confronting Hargrove, about ending this nightmare once and for all. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to pale dawn light and the smell of coffee. Ruth had somehow produced breakfast from their meager supplies. Oatmeal and hardtack and strong black coffee that tasted like salvation. They ate quickly and prepared to ride. Marshal Grant checked his weapons with the efficiency of long practice. Jack did the same. Even Reverend Hayes carried his rifle ready despite his calling. Ruth, you stay here with the children, Daniel said. Like hell I will. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous for 2 little girls to be left alone in a cabin in the mountains. I'm coming. The children can stay in the wagon. We'll park it somewhere safe. Daniel knew better than to argue when Ruth had that look in her eye. They rode into Broken Ridge as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The town was just waking. Shopkeepers opening their doors, miners heading to the day shift. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that today, everything would change. Marshal Grant rode at the front, badge visible. Behind him came Daniel and Ayanna, then Jack and Reverend Hayes. Ruth drove the wagon with the children hidden beneath blankets. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Tom Bridger emerged, his face going pale when he saw the marshal. "Tom Bridger," Grant asked. "Yes, sir." "I'm U.S. Marshal William Grant. I'm here on federal business. I need you to deputize these men and accompany us to the Hargrove estate." Bridger swallowed hard. "Marshal, I don't think—" "I'm not asking, Sheriff, I'm telling. You can cooperate or I can arrest you for obstruction. Your choice." Bridger looked at Daniel, saw no sympathy there, saw only the cold determination of a man who had been pushed too far. "All right," Bridger said quietly. "I'll come." They rode up the hill to Hargrove's estate. It sat above the town like a castle, all stone and timber, expensive, imposing, a monument to one man's greed. Grant knocked on the front door, hard, authoritative. A servant answered, young woman, Mexican, terrified. "U.S. Marshal Grant, I'm here to see Clayton Hargrove. Now." The woman fled inside. Moments later, Hargrove appeared. He wore a silk dressing gown and held a brandy despite the early hour. His face was flushed. Behind him lurked his son Dalton, nursing a bandaged arm. "Marshal," Hargrove said smoothly, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Clayton Hargrove, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted arson, and violation of federal laws regarding the treatment of indigenous persons." Hargrove laughed. "That's absurd. On whose testimony?" "Mine," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Mine," said Ayanna. "Mine," added Ruth. "And mine," Jack finished. Hargrove's smile faded. "This is a joke. You can't seriously expect these charges to stick. I have lawyers, connections, friends in the territorial government." "You had friends," Grant corrected. "But funny thing about friends bought with money, they disappear when the money stops flowing, and federal charges tend to freeze assets pretty quick. I want to speak to Judge Webb." "Judge Webb resigned yesterday, fled to Denver to avoid prosecution. Seems he got smart." Grant pulled out handcuffs. "Now you can come peaceful, or we can do this hard. Your choice." Hargrove's face twisted with rage. For a moment Daniel thought he might actually fight, might pull a hidden weapon and go down shooting. But then Dalton stepped forward. "No," the younger Hargrove said. "This isn't over." He moved fast, pulled a pistol from his waistband, but he did not aim at the marshal or Daniel. He aimed at Ayanna. Everything happened in slow motion. Daniel saw Dalton's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the hatred in the young man's eyes, saw death coming for his wife. He threw himself sideways, knocking Ayanna to the ground as the gun fired. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been a heartbeat before. Jack's rifle boomed. Dalton spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. The pistol clattered across the stone floor. Marshal Grant had his own weapon out, now trained on Clayton Hargrove. "Don't," Grant said quietly. "Don't even think about it." Hargrove's hands rose slowly. The fight had gone out of him. He looked old suddenly, defeated. "Dalton," he whispered. "My boy." "Your boy just tried to murder a woman in front of a U.S. Marshal," Grant said. "He'll hang for that, and you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Justice Mr. Hargrove, finally catching up to you." Part 3. The Trial. The trial happened 3 weeks later in Cheyenne. Federal court, federal judge, federal prosecutor who had made his career fighting corruption in the territories. Daniel sat in the gallery with Ayanna on one side and Clara on the other. Ruth sat behind them with Nolan. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case, about the Apache woman who had defied a powerful man, about the rancher who had risked everything to protect her. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The illegal auction, the death threats, the attacks. Witness after witness testified. Ruth, Jack, Reverend Hayes. Even some of Hargrove's own former employees, men who had been too afraid to speak before but found courage now that the monster had been caged. Ayanna took the stand on the third day. She wore a simple dress Ruth had made for her. Her hair was braided. The scars on her neck were visible evidence of what had been done to her. The prosecutor asked her to tell her story. She did. Simply, honestly, without embellishment or plea for sympathy. Just the facts. When she described the iron collar, several people in the gallery gasped. When she talked about Nolan being chained to the cage, a woman started crying. Hargrove's lawyer tried to break her on cross-examination, suggested she was lying, suggested she had gone willingly with Sterling, suggested her marriage to Daniel was a fraud designed to circumvent immigration law. Ayanna answered each accusation calmly, showed the scars, presented the marriage certificate, looked the lawyer dead in the eye and asked if he thought anyone would choose to wear an iron collar. The lawyer had no response. Dalton Hargrove was tried separately for attempted murder. His case took less than a day. Too many witnesses. Too clear what had happened. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. Guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Clayton Hargrove's trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury took 3 hours to find him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. "You used your wealth and position to oppress the vulnerable," the judge said. "You treated human beings as property. You corrupted the institutions meant to protect people from men like you. This court can think of no punishment severe enough for what you've done, but we'll start with ensuring you never hurt anyone again." Hargrove was led away in chains. He looked at Daniel as he passed. No anger now, just empty acceptance. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them. Questions flew from all directions. Daniel ignored them. He had said everything that needed saying inside that courtroom. But Ayanna stopped, turned to face the crowd. "I want to say something," she said. The reporters went quiet. "I was taken from my home. My family was murdered. I was sold like cattle. A collar was locked around my neck." She touched the scars. "But I survived. And I survived because one man chose to see me as human when everyone else saw me as property. One man chose to fight when it would have been easier to look away." She turned to Daniel. "My husband saved my life, not just by buying my freedom, but by giving me choice, by treating me with dignity, by standing with me when the world stood against us." She looked back at the reporters. "That is the story you should write. Not about the evil of men like Hargrove. We already know evil exists. Write about the courage of good men, about the power of choosing to do right even when it costs everything. That is the story that matters." 3 weeks after the trial had happened, they were sitting at breakfast. Daniel was pouring coffee. Ayanna was cutting bread. Clara and Nayland were playing with wooden blocks Ruth had carved for them, and then Clara spoke. "Papa." The word was soft, tentative, but clear. Daniel's hand froze. The coffee pot hovered in mid-air. Ayanna's knife stopped mid-cut. Clara looked up at her father with those knowing eyes. "Papa," she said again, stronger this time. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her chair, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm right here." "Ayanna," Clara said next, turning to look at the woman who had become her mother in all but blood. Ayanna made a sound like a sob, reached out and pulled both girls into her arms. And Nolan, watching, seeing Clara speak, opened her own mouth. "Shima," she whispered. "Mother." Ruth had to sit down. She was crying too hard to stand. They returned to Broken Ridge 6 weeks after the trial. The town had changed in their absence. Judge Webb's replacement was honest. Sheriff Bridger had resigned, replaced by Jack Sullivan. The mines were under new ownership, men who paid fair wages and cared about their workers. The Frost Ranch looked different, too. While they had been in Cheyenne, the community had come together, rebuilt the barn that had been damaged in Hargrove's final attack, repaired the cabin, stocked the root cellar with supplies. A welcome home gesture, an apology for looking away for too long. Daniel stood in the yard looking at his home with new eyes. This place had been a tomb after Sarah died, a place to hide from life. Now it was something else, a beginning. Ayanna stood beside him, Nalin in her arms. The child had started speaking again, just a few words, but it was progress. She called Ayanna Shima, mother, and she called Daniel Shida, father. Clara had started speaking too 3 weeks ago. Her first word in 9 months had been Papa. Her second had been Ayanna. "What are you thinking?" Ayanna asked. "That I buried one family here, and now I'm starting another. Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" Daniel turned to look at his wife. She was pregnant now, 3 months along. They had learned 2 weeks ago, a child born from their union, from the night they had chosen each other in Ruth's boarding house. "Not for a second," he said. They walked to the cabin together. Inside, Ruth was already cooking. She had insisted on staying with them for a few weeks, helping them settle back in. That evening they sat together around the table, Daniel and Ayanna, Clara and Nalin, Ruth, a family built not from blood, but from choice, from love, from the stubborn refusal to let cruelty win. Daniel looked at Ayanna across the table, saw her smile at something Ruth said, saw her hand rest unconsciously on her belly where their child grew, saw peace beginning to settle into her features. "What are you staring at?" she asked, catching him watching. "My wife, my family, my future." "Sentimental fool," she said. But she was smiling. That night, after the children were asleep and Ruth had retired to the guest room, Daniel and Ayanna lay together in their bed. The bed that had been Sarah's, then his alone, now theirs together. "Tell me something," Ayanna said. "About Sarah. Something good." Daniel thought. She used to sing. Not well, but enthusiastically. She'd make up songs about whatever she was doing. Silly things. Cooking songs. Cleaning songs. Once she made up an entire ballad about a stubborn chicken. Ayanna laughed. The sound was rare and precious. "I would have liked her, I think." "She would have liked you. She believed in fighting for what was right, in standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She would have approved of us." "You think so?" "I know so." They lay in silence for a while. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. An owl called. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. "Daniel," Ayanna said quietly. "Yes." "I love you." It was the first time she had said it. 3 months they had been married. 3 months of building trust, building partnership, building something that was becoming more than convenience. "I love you too," he said. And it was true. Not the same love he had felt for Sarah. This was different. Harder won, built on shared trauma and shared strength, built on choosing each other every day. But it was love, real and deep and true. 6 months later their son was born. They named him James Dakota, after Daniel's son who died, after Ayanna's husband who died, honoring the past while embracing the future. Clara and Nalin adored him immediately, fought over who got to hold him, who got to help feed him. 2 sisters who were not sisters by blood, united by something stronger. Ruth stayed on permanently, becoming grandmother to all 3 children. Jack visited often, bringing news from town and companionship. The ranch prospered. Daniel bred horses. Ayanna grew medicinal herbs and treated the sick who came seeking her knowledge. They built a good life, a quiet life, the kind of life that only seemed possible after you had survived the worst and come out the other side. On James Dakota's first birthday, they held a celebration. Half the town came. People who had once looked at Ayanna with suspicion now brought gifts and smiles. Children who had never seen an Apache woman played with Nalin without fear. Progress. Slow, but real. That evening, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Daniel and Ayanna walked to the oak tree where they had buried the iron collar 2 years before. The tree had grown, new branches reaching toward the sky, life persisting despite everything. "Do you ever think about digging it up?" Daniel asked. destroying it completely. No, Ayana said. Let it stay buried. Let it remind us of what we survived, what we overcame. She took his hand. Her other hand rested on her belly. She was pregnant again. Their second child together, due in winter. We have built something good here, she said. Something worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Let's hope. But let's also prepare. The world is still full of men like Hargrove, still full of cruelty and hate. Our children will need to be strong. They will be. Look at who their mother is. Ayana smiled. Then she did something she had never done before. She sang, softly, in her own language, an Apache lullaby her mother had sung to her. Daniel listened, did not understand the words but felt their meaning. Love, protection, hope. When she finished, he pulled her close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For choosing me, for choosing this life, for choosing us." "Always," she said, "always and forever." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand. Behind them the oak tree stood silent witness. Beneath its roots an iron collar rusted and decayed, a relic of a past that no longer had power. Above, stars emerged in the darkening sky, countless and eternal, watching over two people who had found each other in the darkest of places and built something beautiful from the ruins. A family, a home, a future, worth every fight, worth every sacrifice, worth everything.